Hello, my name is Haven McClure, and this is going to be a presentation for PAD 4391 about terrorism and tourism and the relationship between each. So to go ahead and get started, the purpose of this presentation is to discuss the ripple effects that terrorism causes and how that can affect tourism in the attacked area. So in just 2022, so far, there have been more than 23 terrorist attacks all over the world. In this presentation, I will be covering 4 different terrorist attacks as case studies for how tourism is affected post-attack. That will be the 9/11 World Trade Center attacks, the Boston Marathon bombing, the 2015 Paris attacks, and the 1993 World Trade Center bombings. First, what is terrorism? There is no one true definition of terrorism. They differ very heavily among different sources, but for the purposes of this presentation, we will be using the most general definition from the Oxford Dictionary. Terrorism is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. So terrorism is not a random action. It has a motivation always. So first we're going to discuss the 9/11 terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, and how tourism was affected post-attack. According to the Department of Homeland Security, there was an extreme spike in canceled travel to New York City and surrounding areas. Post 9/11 travel was banned and heavily monitored in New York, so this is to be expected. But in addition, travel to all of the mainland United States significantly declined. The biggest hit from this was overseas travel because the entire United States was perceived to be under attack. The second attack we'll be discussing is the Boston Marathon bombing, which took place on April 15th, 2013. It was predicted in the immediate aftermath of the attacks that tourism would take a massive hit. Many hotels were forced to temporarily close right after the attack, and some never reopened. But in the grand scheme of things, Boston was not significantly negatively affected in tourism by the attacks. The extremely quick recovery made by the city is an extremely impressive feat. Only a few weeks after the attack, tourism returned to normal. Many believe that this is because of the sense of community in Boston and the minimal infrastructure damage. The third attack we'll be discussing is the 2015 Paris terrorist attacks, which occurred on November 13th, 2015. Similarly to the 9/11 attacks, there was an extreme decline in tourism to Paris. The city of Paris relies on tourism heavily because it is seen as a desirable destination from people across the globe. Annually, Paris grosses 248.1 billion euros just in tourism. 2015 was a record high year for tourism in France, but after the attacks in November, we saw a rapid decline. The last attack we'll be discussing today is the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, which occurred on February 26, 1993. Tourism was affected, similar to many of the effects of this attack. It was virtually invisible. The only policy to change after the 1993 attack was a new evacuation plan for people in the World Trade Center. Tourism was not noticeably affected by this attack, and it did not take long for people to return to their day-to-day lives. So what's the general trend? Terrorist attacks almost always decrease tourism rate. While this is always harmful, it can be extremely harmful to areas that heavily rely on tourism to stay afloat. This makes them a strategic place to attack for terrorists seeking economic destruction. Preventing terrorism is extremely hard to do as an individual, but there are things we can do to rebuild communities after terrorist attacks. Terrorism and deception are weapons not of the strong, but of the weak. It is important that we remember that terrorism can happen anywhere at any time. Thank you very much for joining me during this presentation, and I hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your day.